This story is so powerful it challenges everything you think you know about the Wild West set beneath icy winds and flickering firelight. It's a place where fate tightens its grip on the lost and the lonely. It begins with a single unexpected choice, made in a moment of weakness that unleashes courage, love, and redemption against all odds. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Wyatt Cole stood on the porch of his cabin while dusk spilled slowly across the snowbound plains of the Montana Territory. Christmas Eve. The wind screamed like a grieving animal driving ice-sharp flakes into the warped boards of the house he'd built with his own hands. The cabin was sturdy, strong beams, honest timber, but it echoed with absence. 3 winters had passed since Clara Cole died, struck down by a life Wyatt had tried to outrun by vanishing into the frontier. 3 years of quiet, so deep it pressed on his chest. Only the pop of the fire and the uneasy movement of his horse in the barn kept him company. Once his name had traveled ahead of him, whispered with fear in saloons and mountain passes alike. A gunslinger. A killer. Now he was only a man pacing through empty rooms, haunted by what silence can do to a soul. The handbill nailed to the general store post had been a hard, unromantic decision. A shipment of laborers from the east. Auctioned. Human lives reduced to numbers. It was ugly, but loneliness worked its damage slow and steady like rot in good wood. Wyatt didn't want much. Just another pulse in the house. Something alive to push back the quiet. He hadn't looked past that thought when he rode into the huddled town of Bitterroot church bells ringing thin through the cold. Torches spat and hissed, throwing wild shadows across a rough platform set in the middle of town. The Bitterroot folk gathered close, boots stamping, breath steaming. At the front stood Silas Crow, the auctioneer, his smile slick, his voice booming as he shouted above the wind. A line of people stood on the platform, hollow-eyed, shaking. At the very end was a young Chinese woman. Chains bound her wrists and ankles, dark iron biting against thin cotton already stiff with frost. Mockery flew from the crowd like thrown gravel. Wyatt felt the old anger stir cold and heavy in his gut. The bids came slow and mean. "What's anyone supposed to do with that?" Someone laughed. "She ain't even fit for field work," another called out. Silas Crow scowled, frustration sharpening his voice. Wyatt watched the woman. She didn't plead, didn't bow her head. She stood straight, eyes fixed on something far beyond the noise. She wasn't begging. She was surviving. $20. Wyatt's voice broke through the murmurs, rough from disuse. Heads turned. Near the front, Rafe Cutter, a thick-necked rancher with a cruel grin, leaned on the rail. "Well, I'll be damned," Cutter sneered. "The ghost of Bitterroot buying himself a Christmas gift." 25, Cutter added. Wyatt didn't look at him. 50. A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. Cutter's smile thinned. This wasn't about the woman anymore. 55. 100, Wyatt said calmly. The number froze the air. Cutter hesitated, pride grinding against coin, then laughed harshly and shook his head. "She's yours, gunslinger. Enjoy your broken toy." Silas Crow slammed the gavel. "Sold." Wyatt stepped forward, money in hand, deaf to whispers scraping at his back. He stopped in front of the woman whose name he didn't know. A guard unlocked the chains. They hit the snow with a dull final sound. She raised her head and looked at him. Firelight revealed her face, one side smooth and unmarked, pale as porcelain beneath dirt and cold. The other bore a brand burned deep into her cheek just below the eye. A deliberate mark. Ownership carved into flesh. Wyatt's breath stalled. For the first time in years, he couldn't move. Every careful, rational thought Wyatt Cole had clung to shattered in that moment. He wasn't hauling property away from town. He was walking beside a survivor, someone who had been burned, broken, and yet refused to fall. Her eyes were dark and steady, stripped of any plea for mercy. What lived there was fatigue layered over pride, dignity worn thin but unbroken. In that gaze, Wyatt saw the outline of the man he no longer wished to be. He tipped his head toward the waiting horse and wagon. "Come on." She followed without speaking, placing each step with caution as the snow swallowed her boots. Wyatt lifted her into the wagon, his hands quick and distant, careful not to linger. She startled at the contact, but stayed still. As they left town, laughter chased them into the storm, sharp, ugly sounds carried on the wind like a twisted Christmas hymn. Wyatt didn't understand the choice he'd made, only that it had already altered him. When the last lights of Bitterroot vanished behind the curtain of snow, he wondered what kind of fool he'd become. The cabin welcomed them with warmth, firelight pushing back the violence of the blizzard outside. Lin Mei stood in the middle of the room, small beneath the heavy beams, silent as a shadow. Her eyes moved slowly, taking in the rough shelves, the dust along the mantel, the signs of a life lived alone. Wyatt lingered by the door, uncertain. He had purchased a human life, and now had no idea how to stand in the same room with her. "You can get warm by the fire," he said the words, stiff. She gave a faint nod and stepped closer to the hearth, slipping free of the thin blanket he'd offered. Her dress was old-patched again and again. Lin Mei prepared it with calm efficiency, the skill of someone used to scarcity. They ate without speaking spoons, scraping against tin wind clawing at the walls. At last, Wyatt broke the silence. "What's your name, Lin Mei?" she answered, eyes on her bowl. "Wyatt." Silence returned, thicker than before. A name and a scar that was all he knew of her past, of the life stolen before chains and auction blocks. Later, after tending the horses, he found her door closed. A thin ribbon of lamplight glowed beneath it. Wyatt lay in his bed. Clara Cole's bed, listening to the faint sounds of another presence breathing within his walls. "What have I done?" he murmured to the dark. In her small room, Lin Mei lifted her fingers to the brand on her cheek. It was a reflex born of long suffering, a silent reminder of how the world measured her worth. One owner replaced another. One cage traded for the next. Yet something here felt altered, unsettled. Wyatt Cole had not raised a hand against her. He had not claimed her body. When he looked at her, there was something in his eyes she could not name. Was it uncertainty, regret, pity? It did not matter. She had endured harsher masters than confusion. She would endure this as well. Days slipped into a week. The storm finally broke, leaving the land wrapped in clean, blinding white. In that stillness, Lin Mei changed the cabin. She uncovered old cloth stored in a trunk and stitched the torn curtains whole. She scrubbed the floorboards until the grain of the wood shone again. The stale odor of dust and neglect faded, replaced by warm scents of fresh bread and boiled coffee. Without realizing it, Wyatt began listening for her movements, the soft brush of her steps, the quiet rhythm of her work, small sounds that slowly chipped away at the weight of silence. One morning he came in from the cold to find his winter coat spread across the table. The tear he'd ripped on a fence post had been closed with tight, flawless stitches stronger than before. He traced the seam with his thumb. "My mother taught me to sew," Lin Mei said from the stove, her voice low. It was the first thing she'd offered without being asked. "Mine too," Wyatt replied. It was nothing more than that, yet it felt like a narrow bridge laid carefully between them. A week after Christmas, they rode into town for supplies. As Wyatt tied the reins outside the general store, Bitterroot fell quiet. Heads turned. Murmurs followed them like drifting smoke. Esther Gable, the preacher's wife, stepped forward, her expression carved into careful concern. "Mr. Cole, we've been praying for you," she said. "And for this poor, unfortunate soul." Her eyes lingered on Lin May, heavy with pity. "What a fine act of Christian charity you've performed." Lin May's jaw tightened, her hands curling into fists. "We need supplies," Mrs. Gable Wyatt said evenly. Inside the store, Martha Bell stared without shame. Two young men laughed under their breath near the barrels. Wyatt felt heat rise in his chest, not at Lin May, but at the town and at himself for bringing her into this judgment. As they loaded the wagon, Rafe Cutter stepped into their path, his shadow swallowing the light. "Enjoying your purchase, gunslinger?" he said, smiling like a blade. He tipped his hat toward Lin May. "Didn't expect you'd let her out in daylight. Bad for business with a face like that." Lin May showed nothing. She lifted a sack of flour into the wagon on her own. Cutter moved closer. "Tell me, Wyatt, does she scream in a language you understand? Or is that brand meant to keep her quiet?" Wyatt's hand drifted instinctively toward his hip, toward guns that were no longer there. The motion frightened him. He stopped, fists clenched hard at his sides. He was trying to be someone else now. A quieter man. He said nothing. He finished loading the wagon and climbed up beside Lin May. Cutter's laughter followed them down the street as they pulled away. The ride home stretched into a long, frozen silence. Wyatt's grip on the reins went white. He had stood still while another man humiliated her. He had chosen peace instead of her dignity. At last, Lin May spoke. "You do not have to defend me. Maybe I have to defend myself." Wyatt answered the words, tearing free. She turned, then really looked at him for the first time. Something shifted in her eyes. Not trust, but a fracture in what she believed of him. That night, the distance between them felt different. What lay between them was no longer the distance of buyer and bought, but a deeper divide, two souls scarred by the same ruthless world. The next morning, Wyatt Cole was in the barn, repairing a worn harness when hoofbeats cut across the yard. Rafe Cutter rode in with two of his men, leather-creaking guns easy at their hips. Outside, Lin May was hanging laundry, the bright cloth sharp against the snow. Cole Cutter called as he swung down. "I'm here on business. I'll give you $200 for her." "Twice the price. Easy money for a week's time." Lin May went still, her fingers frozen on the line. Wyatt stepped out of the barn, his face set hard. "She's not for sale." Cutter laughed. "Everything's for sale. You're a gunslinger, not a farmer. What good is she to you?" His eyes narrowed. "You were too scared to defend her in town. You're ashamed of her," Cutter went on. "I'm doing you a favor." He stepped closer to Lin May. "I'll even let you keep the $100 you paid. Get off my land, Cutter," Wyatt said. "Or what?" Cutter sneered. "You gonna bore me to death. You're not the man you used to be," Cutter added. His crew spread slightly hands, resting near their guns. Lin May looked at Wyatt, then her face pale fear flashing in her eyes. Not the fear of the auction block. This was different. She expected him to fail her again. Something in Wyatt broke. The quiet man he'd tried to become fell away useless. He wasn't outrunning his past, he'd been surrendering to it. Wyatt stepped forward into the open, away from the barn. "The last man who called me a coward," Wyatt said softly, his voice dropping until even the wind seemed to listen, is buried on a hill outside Wichita. Cutter's smile faltered. For the first time he saw the shadow he'd only heard rumors about. "You've got 3 seconds to ride out of here," Wyatt continued calm and deadly, "before I remind you why folks used to bolt their doors when they heard my name." Cutter glanced at his men, then back at Wyatt's eyes. There was no bluff there. Cursing, he mounted his horse. "This ain't over, gunslinger," He rode out fast, Cutter's crew scrambling behind him. The yard fell silent. Lin May stood by the clothesline staring at Wyatt, her breath coming quick and shallow. He had defended her. He had chosen her. Wyatt crossed the yard, his heart pounding. "He won't be back," he said. "You're safe here." She searched his face, confusion mirroring his own. "Why?" she whispered. "Because this is your home," Wyatt answered, and the words felt truer than anything he'd said in 3 years. That night, for the first time, her door remained slightly open. Spring came late, but when it arrived, it changed everything. Green shoots broke through the mud. The creek swelled with meltwater. Together they planted a garden working shoulder to shoulder in the warming earth. Wyatt showed her how to break the stubborn soil. Lin May taught him how to space the seed's knowledge from a distant life she never spoke of. Their hands brushed now and then, sending a shock through him that had nothing to do with the cold ground. One evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sun set fire to the mountains in shades of orange and purple. A quiet ease had settled between them, a silence that spoke more than words ever could. On a sudden impulse, Lin May rested her head against Wyatt Cole's shoulder. Wyatt froze, every muscle locking tight. He caught the faint scent of soap and wood smoke in her hair. Slowly, carefully, he lifted his hand and touched her face, his thumb following the gentle line of her jaw. She did not pull away. Then his fingers brushed the edge of the brand on her cheek. The smallest shiver ran through her. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "It is part of me," she said softly. "It's not who you are," Wyatt answered. Their eyes met, and what she saw there was not pity, but something fierce and aching, a tenderness that burned. He leaned closer, the weight of old ghosts rising between them. For one fragile moment, fear returned. Fear of pain, of loss, of opening a door that might never close again. He saw that fear in her eyes. She saw it in his. She eased back just enough. The moment slipped away. "It is late," she said, standing. "Good night, Wyatt." She went inside, and the quiet click of her door echoed louder than the wind. Wyatt remained on the porch long after, watching stars scatter across the sky, cursing himself for his hesitation. By morning, the space between them had returned. A careful, distant chill settled over the cabin. Wyatt rode out to Clara Cole's grave for the first time since the snow had pulled back. He stood before the simple wooden crosswords thick in his throat. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said at last. "I thought honoring you meant staying alone forever. But that isn't living. That's just waiting to die." The truth settled hard. He hadn't been guarding her memory, he'd been hiding behind it. "I think I'm falling in love with her," he confessed to the quiet earth. "And it scares me to death." The weight on his chest lifted. It wasn't betrayal. It was permission. Wyatt rode home with purpose, but the cabin stood empty. Cold dread seized him. On the kitchen table lay her neatly folded clothes and a small leather pouch holding the $20 he'd paid the town doctor. Beside it rested a note written in careful, graceful lines. "Thank you for your kindness. I cannot remain as a shadow in another person's home. I will not be the cause of your fear." She was gone. Wyatt understood too late. His hesitation had looked like rejection. The silence that rushed back into the cabin crushed him. He'd been given a second chance at life, and let it slip away. He found her in town as she prepared to board the morning stagecoach east, her entire world tied into a small cloth bundle. The Bitterroot folk whispered as they watched. Wyatt spotted Rafe Cutter lounging against the hotel porch, a satisfied grin cutting his face. Wyatt dismounted and crossed the street, his boots striking the dirt loud as gunshots. The town seemed to hold its breath. He stopped in front of her. Lin May. She wouldn't meet his eyes. There is nothing left to say. The hell there isn't, Wyatt said, his voice carrying down the street. I was a coward. I was afraid to feel anything again because I didn't want to lose it. He swallowed hard. But losing you for a single day has been worse than the last 3 years of being alone. Rafe Cutter burst out laughing. Listen to that, he called to the crowd. A gunslinger begging over his property? Wyatt Cole turned slowly. She is not my property, he said evenly. She's my wife. A sharp gasp rippled through the Bitterroot folk. Lin May's head snapped up her eyes, wide breath caught somewhere between shock and disbelief. You ain't married, Cutter scoffed, pushing off the porch rail. No papers. No preacher. You're wrong, Wyatt said. His hand settled easy, natural against the worn leather of his gun belt. There's my word. He let the silence stretch. And here that's law enough. If you or anyone else has a problem with it, say so now. Cutter's gaze flicked to Wyatt's hand, then to his face, calm, steady, dangerous. The stories he'd laughed at stood there, breathing in front of him. He said nothing. Wyatt turned back to Lin May. His voice softened. I'm not asking you to serve me, he said. I'm asking you to build a life with me, to stand beside me. He swallowed. To be afraid with me. He held out his hand. Please, come home. Tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting clean paths through dust and pain. She looked from his open hand to his eyes and saw it truth without pity, a future not built on chains. Slowly she placed her hand in his. Wyatt closed his fingers around hers, gentle his thumb, resting near the brand on her cheek, not to erase it, but to accept it. Together they turned away from the stagecoach and the silent town, walking toward the wagon. They were married the following Sunday by Reverend Amos. That evening the porch of the cabin, now truly their home, glowed in the soft gold of sunset. The garden they'd planted stood healthy and green. Next year, Wyatt set his arm around her shoulders, we'll keep chickens. Lin May leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. Maybe a child, she said quietly. Hope, once a stranger that frightened them both, had learned their names. The marriage license hung on the wall, but their real vow lived elsewhere in the dark, rich soil of the garden, in shared silences, in the brave choice to face fear together. Do you ever regret it? Lin May asked, tracing the stitching on his shirt. That day at the auction, Wyatt watched the first stars appear. Every day, he said. She stiffened. He turned to her eyes, sure. I regret every day I wasted before it. I should have found you sooner. He kissed her, an unhurried kiss that spoke of blizzards endured and seasons planted. The gunslinger finally laid his weapons down. The woman once bound in chains found a place to stand free. Spring had come late to their corner of Montana, but it had come to stay. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso Legal, bara disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully only to support production while keeping human supervision over editing emotional tone and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.